Hey, Stewart's Chapel, this is Don Pierson, and Don counts behind the camera, and this is Wednesday's Devotion. Wednesday's Devotion. We're going to take a look at the calling of Adam. Now, not everybody looks at Adam in a sense of a calling. Adam's calling is very specific, and it's lifetime, and for most of us, it would be general. So, specific to Adam, lifetime, but it's general in the relationship to all mankind. We share this calling, and it appears that this calling has no end, at least not on this earth. So we'll look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 28 through 30. Then God blessed them and said to them, that is, God created man and said to them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. Later on, God will give man instructions about the tree of good and evil, and the tree of knowledge, and the tree of life. Those were also very specific to God's will or calling upon man's life. I chose Adam to share with you that sometimes, and I hope it's rare, but sometimes when we refuse to be obedient to God's call on our life, it has severe consequences on everyone else. We call it the fall of man, the fall of Adam and Eve, when they took of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, the tree of knowledge, and they ate it when they weren't supposed to. And this is not a devotion about the fall of man. The devotion is dealing with the calling. I will say this. I think that every time we fail in God's calling, there's consequences for others. Yesterday I talked to you about the fact that the reason I'm not in Belize was not because God called me home, but because I was done with God's calling. And God has called me many, many times. He's shown me incredible grace. But there's a part of me at times that wonders not what the consequences for me, but what were the consequences for others in Belize because I did not be faithful to my call. I've seen that. I've seen pastors who are called to preach and pastor who fail. And the consequences of their fail in their calling affected many. I've seen individuals who were called to teach and who God's hand in teaching was very obvious, but in their fall, others suffered. You remember Jonah? The sailors suffered because of Jonah's rebellion. I cannot help but think that anytime God calls us and we fail, it doesn't just affect us. It affects others. Now, I don't know how. I hope it's not as drastically as Adam and Eve's fall and their failure to do the calling that God had gave to them. When you think about it, it was just pretty simple calling. But you know what? I have found it don't matter when it really comes down to us failing. When we fail in God's calling, it's usually because of the simple stuff and not on the big stuff of the calling. I want to challenge you to really think. Perhaps it's a time of confession and asking for God's mercy because God's called you and you have been slow. Or maybe you had your hand on the plow and you've taken it off. You've made all kinds of excuses. Maybe it's your work. I mean, I'm making more money this way. You know, God, I got to take care of my family. I mean, on and on and on. Our failure in being obedient to God's calling rarely just affects us. Rarely just affects us. The consequences of us failing in our calling, I believe and I am afraid, affects far more than we realize the lives of others. Love you, Steers Chapel.